Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had 9 tails, kurama, inside him. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world is not born equal. That was the harsh, immutable truth that Izuku Midoriya learned at the tender age of 4. It was a truth delivered not in the heat of a battlefield, nor from the mouth of a cackling supervillain, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of a pediatrician's office. The air in the room smelled sharp, a mix of rubbing alcohol and a minty candy sitting in a glass bowl on the reception desk outside. The hum of the air conditioning unit in the window felt exceptionally loud in the suffocating silence that had just fallen over the room. You should probably give it up. The words were spoken with a casual indifference that defied the weight they carried. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald man with a bushy mustache and a pair of thick, round goggles resting on his forehead, leaned back in his leather chair. He didn't look like a man who had just shattered a child's universe. He looked like a man who was ready for his lunch break. Izuku sat perfectly still. The All Might action figure in his small, chubby hands, the one he had been practically vibrating with excitement to show the doctor just minutes ago, slipped from his grasp. It hit the linoleum floor with a hollow plastic clatter that echoed through the small clinic room. Beside him, his mother, Inko Midoriya, inhaled sharply. Her hands fluttered nervously over her purse. "Did give it up? Doctor, surely there's been some mistake. I mean, all the other kindergartners have started showing signs already. I can pull small objects to myself, and my husband breathes fire. It's just a late bloom, right?" Dr. Tsubasa sighed, tapping a pen against the X-ray pin to the glowing light board on the wall. The image showed a stark, black and white scan of a child's foot. "Mrs. Midoriya, you're aware of the prevailing theory regarding quirk evolution, aren't you?" the doctor asked, adjusting his posture. "It all comes down to the joints. Specifically, the pinky toe. When quirks first began appearing, researchers noticed that those who developed them were missing the extra joint in their pinky toe, a sign of the human body streamlining itself for the next stage of evolution." He pointed the back of his pen at the X-ray. "Izuku here has 2 joints. It's a genetic throwback. An evolutionary dead end, to put it bluntly. Medically speaking, there is absolutely zero chance of him ever developing a quirk. He is perfectly healthy, but he is, and always will be, quirkless." Izuku didn't hear the rest of the conversation. The doctor's voice faded into a dull, rushing roar, like the sound of the ocean trapped inside a seashell. He stared blankly ahead, his wide, emerald eyes fixed on the dropped All Might figure. Quirkless. The word felt alien. It was a word reserved for history books, for the elderly generations who had lived before the dawn of the extraordinary. It wasn't meant for him. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was going to be a hero. He was going to save people with a fearless smile, just like All Might. But the X-ray didn't lie. His body was wrong. He was broken. The car ride home was a blur of muted colors and heavy silence. The rain had begun to fall, smattering against the windshield in fat, gloomy drops. Inko gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes welling with unshed tears. She kept casting quick, heartbroken glances in the rearview mirror at her son, but Izuku just stared out the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. When they arrived at their apartment, Izuku walked like a wind-up toy winding down. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just marched into his bedroom, the room that was a shrine to the symbol of peace. Posters of All Might covered every inch of wallpaper. Bedsheets, curtains, and action figures proudly displayed the red, white, blue, and gold of the world's greatest hero. Without a word, Izuku climbed into his desk chair and reached for the computer mouse. With trembling fingers, he navigated to the video sharing site he visited every single day. He clicked on the familiar thumbnail, an old, grainy video of a disaster site in America. The video played. The sound of sirens, crumbling debris, and panicked shouting filled the quiet bedroom. And then, a booming laugh cut through the chaos. "Fear not, citizens. Hope has arrived." On the screen, a massive silhouette emerged from the smoke, carrying a dozen people on his back and in his arms. His smile was blinding, a beacon of absolute safety in a world of terror. "Because I am here." Izuku watched the video. Then he played it again. And again. The sun dipped below the horizon outside, casting long, dark shadows across his room, but the glow of the computer monitor illuminated his face. The door creaked open. Inko stood in the doorway, the hallway light framing her silhouette. She looked at her son, bathed in the blue light of the screen, his small shoulders trembling. Izuku didn't turn around. He just pointed a small, shaking finger at the screen, at the smiling face of his idol. Mom! His voice was a frail, fragile whisper, choked with the tears he had been holding back since the clinic. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what kind of trouble they're in. He never gives up. Izuku slowly turned his chair around. His face was a mask of sheer agony, tears streaming down his freckled cheeks in heavy rivers. His bottom lip quivered so violently he could barely form the words. Can I be a hero too? It was a plea. A desperate, begging plea for someone, anyone, to tell him that the doctor was wrong. To tell him that his dream wasn't dead. Inko's composure broke. She let out a wretched, sobbing gasp and ran across the room. She fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around his small body, pulling him against her chest. I'm sorry, Izuku, she wailed, her tears soaking into his all-might t-shirt. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. No, Izuku thought, burying his face into his mother's shoulder as his own sobs finally ripped from his throat. No, Mom. That wasn't what I wanted you to say. He cried until he had nothing left. He cried until his eyes were swollen and his head pounded with a dull, rhythmic ache. Eventually, the sheer exhaustion of his grief overtook his 4-year-old body. Slumped against his mother, enveloped in the dark of his room and the tragic ruins of his dream, Izuku Midoriya closed his eyes and drifted into a heavy, suffocating sleep. Drip, drip, drip. Izuku stirred. The air was cold, biting, damp, and smelling faintly of copper and mildew. This wasn't his bed. The soft, comforting fabric of his all-might blankets was gone. He opened his eyes and gasped. He wasn't in his room anymore. He was lying on his back in shallow, lukewarm water. The water barely covered his ears, but the chill of it seeped into his bones. Panic instantly flared in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, splashing in the ankle-deep water. Mom? He cried out. His voice echoed, bouncing off unseen walls in the gloom. Mom! Where are you? Where am I? There was no answer. Izuku rubbed his eyes, trying to adjust to the dim light. He found himself standing in a massive, subterranean corridor. The walls were made of ancient, moss-covered brick, stretching up so high they faded into absolute darkness. Giant, rusted pipes ran along the walls and ceiling, groaning and creaking under unseen pressure. The water at his feet was murky, reflecting the faint, sickly yellow light that seemed to emanate from nowhere in particular. It looked like a sewer. But a sewer built for giants. Izuku whimpered, wrapping his small arms around himself. Is this a villain's quirk? Am I kidnapped? His heart hammered against his ribs. He was terrified. But as he stood there shivering, another sensation began to wash over him. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a heavy, rhythmic pulsing, like a second heartbeat vibrating through the water and up through the soles of his feet. Thump, thump, thump. It felt warm. Uncomfortably warm, a stark contrast to the freezing air of the corridor. And intertwined with that warmth was an emotion so thick it was almost suffocating. It felt like anger. It felt like raw, unfiltered malice. Despite his terror, an unnatural compulsion tugged at Izuku. His feet moved on their own, splashing softly through the water. He walked down the massive, cavernous hallway, following the pulsing heat. The corridor widened, opening up into a chamber so vast it defied comprehension. The ceiling was nowhere to be seen, lost in a swirling abyss of shadows. But what dominated the room, what immediately brought Izuku to a dead halt, was the structure looming in front of him. It was a cage. Massive iron bars, thicker than the trunks of ancient redwood trees, stretched from the watery floor up into the darkness. The bars were spaced wide apart, wide enough for a truck to drive through, but an invisible, shimmering barrier seemed to ripple between them. At the very center of the cage, locking two colossal doors together, was a piece of parchment paper adorned with intricate, swirling black kanji. Seal. Izuku stared up at the paper, trembling. The overwhelming heat was radiating from behind those bars. The space beyond the cage was pitch black. But as Izuku stood there, frozen in fear, the shadows began to move. Whoosh! A massive exhale of air blew out from between the iron bars. It wasn't wind, it was breath. It smelled of sulfur, burning ash, and ancient blood. The force of it nearly knocked Izuku off his feet, sending ripples across the water. Then, the darkness shifted. Two massive shapes, glowing with a sinister, blood-red luminescence, snapped open in the void. They were eyes. Eyes the size of houses, with slit pupils sharper than any blade Izuku had ever seen. They glared down at the tiny, 4-year-old boy standing before the cage. Izuku couldn't breathe. His lungs seized. His primitive brain screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything but stand before this apex predator, but his legs were locked in place. The water began to bubble around the cage as the entity within slowly rose. The shadows peeled back, revealing a monstrous visage. Coarse, crimson-orange fur matted over a snout lined with teeth the size of skyscrapers. The creature's face was fox-like, but twisted into a snarl of demonic fury. Long, jagged ears twitched in the gloom. And behind the creature, swirling like a hurricane of red fire, were tails. 1, 2, 3. Izuku lost count as the massive appendages thrashed against the walls of the cage, shaking the entire cavern. So, the voice did not come from the creature's mouth. It exploded inside Izuku's head, a deep, rumbling baritone that vibrated against his skull. It was a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates, ancient and dripping with disdain. My new warden comes to visit. And what a pathetic sight it is. Izuku fell backward, splashing into the water. What are you? He shrieked, tears springing to his eyes. Are you a villain? Let me go. I want my mom. The giant fox let out a low, rumbling chuckle that sounded like an earthquake. The water violently shook, splashing over Izuku's head. A villain? Do not insult me with the petty titles of your fragile species. I am Kurama, the nine-tailed fox. And unfortunately for both of us, brat, I am your prisoner. Prisoner? Izuku stammered, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, desperate to put distance between himself and the bars. I don't understand. Where am I? You are in your own mind, you sniveling whelp, the fox sneered, leaning its massive snout closer to the bars. The red slit eyes tracked Izuku's pathetic retreat, or rather, the space where my soul was forcefully bound to yours. I have watched through your eyes since the day you were born. I have listened to your insufferable whining, your pathetic obsession with those spandex-wearing fools you call heroes. Izuku froze. In my mind? Why, you're a quirk? Izuku whispered, his eyes widening. A spark of desperate hope ignited in his chest. The doctor said I didn't have a quirk. He said I was quirkless. But you're here. You're my quirk. The fox's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage flaring within them. A massive, clawed hand slammed against the iron bars. Clang! The sound was deafening. The entire sewer shook violently, and Izuku screamed, covering his ears. I am not a quirk. Kurama roared, the sheer force of his voice whipping the water into a frenzy. I am a tailed beast. A construct of pure, ancient chakra. I am older than the continents you walk upon. I am a force of nature, a god among insects. Do not dare compare me to those genetic mutations your pathetic race flaunts. Izuku cowered, sobbing openly now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please don't eat me. Kurama scoffed, pulling his face back into the shadows, though his glowing eyes remained fixed on the boy. Eat you? I am sealed inside you. If you die, I die. A temporary inconvenience for a being of my stature, as I will eventually reform, but a nuisance I would prefer to avoid. The fox lowered its massive head, resting its chin on its crossed paws just behind the gate. The oppressive, killing intent dialed back a fraction, replaced by a dark, mocking amusement. I watched what happened today, Izuku Midoriya. I felt your despair. The doctor told you that you are worthless. That you are broken. And your own mother wept because she agreed with him. The words pierced through Izuku's fear, hitting him right in the wounded core of his heart. He looked down at the dark water, his tears creating ripples on the surface. "I'm not worthless," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. "Are you not?" Kurama purred, the voice dripping with cynical poison. "In your world, power is everything. Those with it are gods. Those without it are trampled beneath the boots of the strong. You are the lowest of the low. A quirkless insect destined to be crushed." Izuku gripped his wet shorts, his knuckles turning white. I'm going to be a hero." "A hero?" Kurama laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "With what power? Your weak, fragile human body? You will die before you even begin." The giant fox shifted, its red tails swirling hypnotically in the dark. "But it does not have to be that way." Izuku slowly looked up. Kurama's eyes were glowing with a seductive, dangerous light. "I hate humanity. I hate this cage. And I hate the man who put me inside you, your coward of a father, who fled rather than face the consequences of harboring my power. But you and I are bound, brat. If you are weak, I am humiliated. I will not have my vessel be a stepping stone for the arrogant fools of this era." A wisp of red, bubbling energy seeped through the iron bars. It hovered over the water, dancing like a living flame. It radiated an intense, intoxicating heat. "I offer you a deal, child," Kurama whispered, his voice wrapping around Izuku's mind like a serpent. "Tear off that seal. Open this gate. Give me control, and I will lend you my power. I will give you the strength to crush anyone who looks down on you. The doctor. The children who will inevitably mock you. You can make them bow to you. You can tear this wretched, unfair world apart." The red energy drifted closer to Izuku. It whispered promises of strength, of revenge, of never having to feel small or helpless ever again. It was a terrifying power, fueled by hatred and bloodlust. Izuku stared at the bubbling red chakra. He thought of the doctor's cold eyes. He thought of his mother's apologies. He felt the phantom pain of a shattered dream. If he took this power, he wouldn't be weak anymore. He wouldn't be quirkless. He reached out a trembling hand toward the red flame. Kurama's grin widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Yes, take it. Let the hatred fuel you." Izuku's fingers hovered mere millimeters from the searing red energy. Then he stopped. He looked at the red fire, feeling the sheer malice radiating from it. This wasn't the warmth of a hero. This wasn't the blinding, golden light of All Might saving hundreds of people from a disaster. This was the heat of a burning building. It was the power to destroy, not the power to protect. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what kind of trouble they're in. Izuku slowly pulled his hand back. He clenched it into a tiny fist and pressed it against his chest. Kurama's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, fool? Take the power." Izuku looked up. His small body was still trembling, his face pale and tear-stained, but a startling shift occurred in his emerald eyes. The sheer, paralyzing terror had receded, replaced by a stubborn, irrational defiance. "No," Izuku said. His voice was small, but it echoed loudly in the cavern. Kurama growled, a sound that shook the very foundations of the mindscape. "No? Do you not understand what I am offering you, you insolent whelp? I am offering you the world. I don't want to tear the world apart." Izuku yelled back, squeezing his eyes shut as he shouted. "I want to save people. I want to be a hero." "You cannot be a hero without power." "Maybe." Izuku cried out, tears spilling down his cheeks again. "Maybe I can't. But if I use your power to hurt people, if I use it just to make people afraid of me, then I wouldn't be a hero anyway. I'd just be a monster." Silence fell over the cavern. The water stopped rippling. The bubbling red chakra retreated, slithering back between the iron bars and fading into the darkness. Kurama stared down at the 4-year-old boy. The great fox was taken aback. For centuries, humanity had treated him as nothing more than a weapon of mass destruction. Ninjas, warlords, and kings had all sought his power, willing to sacrifice their own souls to wield his hatred. Yet here, a child, a fragile, terrified child who had just had his entire world shattered, was looking the physical manifestation of hatred in the eye and rejecting it on moral grounds. It was utterly absurd. It was naive, and yet deep within the ancient beast's chest, a flicker of something completely foreign stirred. Amusement. Kurama snorted, sending a gust of hot wind over the boy. A monster, am I? Bold words from a crying infant. The fox lay back down, the massive red eyes slowly closing, cloaking the cage in darkness once more. Very well, Izuku Midoriya. Cling to your pathetic ideals. Cling to your naive dreams of heroism. But this world is cruel. It will grind your ideals into dust. And when you finally realize that you need my claws to survive, I will be waiting. The water beneath Izuku suddenly felt like it was freezing. The air grew unbearably heavy, and Izuku felt himself falling backwards, sinking into the dark, murky depths. The giant iron cage faded away, swallowed by the abyss, and Kurama's cynical voice echoed one last time before everything went black. We have a long life ahead of us, brat. Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. He was back in his bedroom. Morning sunlight was streaming through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was tangled in his all-might blankets, drenched in a cold sweat. His chest heaved as he sucked in greedy lungfuls of air. He looked around frantically. No sewer. No giant cage. No terrifying red eyes. A dream. Izuku whispered, his racing heart slowly beginning to calm down. It was just a nightmare. He rubbed his face with his hands, exhaling a long, shaky breath. But as his fingers brushed his cheeks, he felt a strange, tingling sensation. Frowning, Izuku climbed out of bed and padded over to the mirror hanging on his closet door. He looked at his reflection. His green eyes were puffy and red from crying the night before. His wild, curly green hair was an absolute mess. But that wasn't what made him freeze. There, on his cheeks, intersecting his familiar dusting of freckles, were marks. 3 faint, symmetrical lines on each cheek, curving slightly outward. They looked like scars, but they weren't raised or bleeding. They looked like whiskers. Izuku touched the marks. They were warm, and in the deepest, darkest corner of his mind, a low, rumbling hum echoed. A sound that belonged to a beast trapped in a cage. It wasn't a dream. 10 years is a long time. For the world, 10 years meant the rise of new heroes, the fall of new villains, and the ever-growing commercialization of quirks. Society continued its steady, brightly colored march into an era where the extraordinary was mundane, and the superpowered were celebrities. But for Izuku Midoriya, 10 years was an eternity of endurance. Aldera Junior High was not a place of learning. For Izuku, it was a battlefield. A daily gauntlet of survival where the rules were simple, the strong dictated reality, and the weak suffered it. 14-year-old Izuku sat at his desk in the middle row, his head down, frantically scribbling in a burnt, battered notebook labeled Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. He wore the standard black Gakuin uniform, though his sleeves were pulled down to hide the faint, pinkish burn scars on his wrists. He was older now. The baby fat had melted away from his face, leaving sharp features, though his eyes remained the same wide, anxious emerald green. And etched onto his cheeks, darker and more pronounced than they had been a decade ago, were the 6 whisker marks. Hey, look at Midoriya! Is he drawing in his creepy little stalker diary again? Man, those tattoos on his face are so lame. Who tattoos their own face to look like a cat? He's quirkless, remember? Probably just begging for attention. The whispers from his classmates buzzed around him like angry wasps. Izuku ignored them, focusing entirely on sketching the armor plating of the new hero, Empty Lady, who had debuted that morning. He had learned early on that reacting only made it worse. Apathy was his shield. Unfortunately, his internal roommate did not share his philosophy. TCH. Look at them, the deep, grinding voice echoed in Izuku's mind. It was a voice Izuku had heard every single day for the past 10 years. A collection of weak, useless apes puffing their chests out because they can stretch their fingers or sweat acid. Let me out, brat. I'll show them what real power looks like. I'll bite their heads off and mount them on my tails. No, Kurama, Izuku thought back, keeping his face perfectly neutral. It took immense concentration to hold a mental conversation while maintaining a physical facade, a skill he had perfected over the years. We talked about this. No eating my classmates. I am a 9-tailed demon fox, not a lapdog. I require blood, Izuku. Blood and despair. Not algebra. You're getting algebra, and you're going to like it, Izuku retorted mentally. Besides, you failed the last math quiz. I did not fail. The human concept of numbers is flawed and beneath me. Izuku suppressed a sigh. Kurama had not changed. For 10 years, the fox had been a constant, cynical, and highly bloodthirsty companion. He resided in the seal, watching the world through Izuku's eyes, constantly offering him the power to obliterate his bullies. And Izuku had constantly refused. It hadn't been easy. There were days, dark, painful days, where the bullying became so severe, so physically and emotionally agonizing, that the seal holding Kurama would tremble. The red chakra would leak into Izuku's system, fueled by his own rising anger and despair. His eyes would flash crimson, his canines would sharpen, and his strength would spike to terrifying, bone-breaking levels. But every time, Izuku fought it back. He remembered the promise he made to himself at 4 years old. He would not become a monster. He would not rely on borrowed, hateful power to survive. He would become a hero on his own terms, even if the world laughed at him. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future, the homeroom teacher announced, standing at the front of the class with a thick stack of papers. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but the teacher suddenly smirked, throwing the papers into the air. You're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted. Students leaped from their desks, cheering and activating their quirks. Hands turned to rock, eyeballs popped out, small fires ignited in palms. It was a chaotic display of genetic lottery winnings. Fools, Kurama scoffed in Izuku's mind. Half of them would wet themselves if they faced genuine killing intent. That boy with the extending fingers? I give him 3 seconds against a real threat before he cries for his mother. Be nice, Izuku thought, shrinking down in his seat and raising his hand meekly alongside his classmates. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher said, though he didn't bother to scold anyone for unauthorized quirk usage. But using your powers in school is against the rules. Sensei, don't lump me in with these losers. The booming, arrogant voice cut through the noise like a scythe. Izuku flinched. The muscles in his back tightened, and his heart rate spiked. In his mindscape, Kurama instantly stopped complaining about the other students. A low, dangerous growl rumbled through the water of the cage. Sitting in the front row, his feet kicked up onto his desk, was Katsuki Bakugo. Ash blonde hair, crimson eyes, and an ego the size of a small country. As if I had anything like their crappy quirks, Bakugo sneered, leaning back in his chair. I'm the only one in this trash heap who's got what it takes. The class immediately turned on him in outrage. Hey Bakugo! Shut up! Make me, you extras! Bakugo barked, small explosions popping like firecrackers in his palms. Oh, if I remember correctly, you want to go to UA High, right, Bakugo? The teacher asked, looking at his clipboard. A hushed awe fell over the room. UA was the National Academy, the top hero school in the country. Its acceptance rate was abysmal. That's right, Bakugo said, jumping onto his desk. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get in. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name will be inscribed on the list of top earners. Arrogant whelp, Kurama snarled. The red chakra began to stir in Izuku's mind, a familiar, burning pressure building behind his eyes. He is a loud, explosive insect. Let me crush him, Izuku. Just once. I will shatter his arms and melt his vocal cords. He will never bark at us again. No, Izuku commanded his inner demon, clamping down on the foreign anger invading his emotions. Leave him alone. Oh yeah, Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, right? The teacher mentioned casually, completely unaware of the bomb he had just dropped. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Izuku froze, his pencil stopping midway through a sketch of empty lady's mask. He slowly looked up. Every single pair of eyes in the classroom was staring at him. For a second, no one moved. Then, the entire class burst into uproarious, mocking laughter. Midoriya? No way! You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What's he going to do, take notes at the villains? Izuku stood up quickly, his face burning. They got rid of that rule. There's no rule against quirkless people taking the exam. It could be me. I could be the first one to. Boom! Before Izuku could finish his sentence, a violent explosion rocked his desk. The force of the blast threw him backward, his chair tipping over and sending him crashing to the floor. Smoke filled the air, smelling of burnt sugar and sweat. Bakugo stood over him, his right hand smoking, his crimson eyes burning with absolute, murderous fury. "Listen up, Deku," Bakugo growled, using the degrading nickname he had given Izuku years ago. "You're even worse than the rest of these rejects. You're completely quirkless. And what, you think you can rub shoulders with me?" Izuku scrambled backward until his back hit the chalkboard. "And no. Wait, Kaken. It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. I swear!" He held his hands up defensively. His heart was hammering in his chest, terrified of the explosive teen looming over him. But deeper down, buried under layers of mental fortitude, another emotion was fighting to break free. The water in the mindscape was boiling. Kurama was thrashing against the bars of his cage, his 9 tails whipping into a frenzy. "Kill him!" Kurama roared, the sheer volume of his voice causing a physical migraine to spike in Izuku's head. "Tear his throat out. He dares lay his hands on us? I will burn him to ash. I will feast on his bones." A faint, red mist began to emit from Izuku's pores, invisible to the naked eye but palpable in the sudden drop in the room's temperature. The whisker marks on Izuku's face darkened, turning from faint scars to a deep, jagged black. Izuku clamped his jaw shut, biting his own tongue to keep the demonic energy at bay. The taste of copper filled his mouth. "Stop it, Kurama!" Izuku screamed internally, wrestling with the suffocating hatred that threatened to hijack his nervous system. "Don't do it! I won't let you! It's been my dream since I was little," Izuku said aloud, his voice trembling, forcing his eyes to stay wide and submissive, hiding the monstrous slit pupils that were trying to form. "And there's no harm in trying." "Try? Try what?" Bakugo bellowed, leaning in close. "The entrance exam? You'd take the test just to fail. What the hell can you do, Deku?" Izuku looked down, breaking eye contact. He didn't answer. He couldn't. If he opened his mouth, he was afraid he wouldn't speak with his own voice. He was afraid Kurama's guttural growl would rip out of his throat. The teacher finally intervened, sighing as if the whole ordeal was merely a mild annoyance. "All right, settle down, Bakugo. Take your seat." Bakugo clicked his tongue, glaring at Izuku with pure disgust before turning around and marching back to his desk. Izuku slowly picked himself up, righting his chair and sitting back down. His hands were shaking violently. Not from fear of Bakugo, but from the sheer physical exertion of holding back the 9-tailed fox. "You are weak," Kurama hissed, his voice settling into a low, disappointed rumble. "You allow him to abuse you. You are a pathetic vessel." "I'm not weak," Izuku replied mentally, his mental voice exhausted. "Restraint takes strength. If I let you out, I'm just proving them right. I'm proving I'm a monster. You will break one day, Izuku Midoriya. The dam will burst. And when it does, I will drown this world in red." The rest of the school day was a blur. Izuku kept his head down, ignoring the mocking stares and the whispered insults. When the final bell rang, he waited in his seat, packing his bags slowly to ensure the classroom was mostly empty before he left. He didn't want to run into Bakugo again. He picked up his hero analysis notebook, looking at the charred cover where Bakugo's explosion had hit it. He sighed, brushing the soot off the cover. Suddenly, a hand snatched the notebook from his grasp. Izuku looked up. Bakugo was standing there, flanked by 2 of his lackeys. "We're not done talking yet, Deku," Bakugo said, waving the notebook in the air. "What's that, Katsuki?" one of the lackeys asked, leaning in to read the cover. "Hero analysis for the future? Seriously? He's still doing that? It's fine, isn't it?" Izuku stammered, standing up. "Give it back." Bakugo didn't look at Izuku. He simply placed the notebook between his palms. Boom! An explosion went off point blank. The notebook was instantly charred, the pages curling and burning. Izuku gasped. "That's mean." Bakugo then turned and casually tossed the burning notebook out the open window. It plummeted down into the koi pond below. Izuku stared at the window in shock. His hard work. His notes. His dreams, literally thrown away like garbage. Rip his arm off. The command from Kurama was cold, sharp, and entirely devoid of emotion. It wasn't a roar of rage, it was a tactical suggestion. No, most top-tier heroes have stories about them from their school days, Bakugo said, leaning in close to Izuku, his red eyes piercing into Izuku's soul. I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this mediocre city public middle school. I mean, I'm a perfectionist. Bakugo placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Smoke plumed from his fingers, singing the black fabric of Izuku's uniform. It burned. So anyway, Bakugo smiled, a cruel, vicious grin. Don't apply to UA, nerd. Izuku couldn't speak. He just stood there, his body rigid, his eyes locked on Bakugo. The heat on his shoulder was nothing compared to the roaring inferno raging inside his mind. Bakugo turned to leave, his lackeys laughing as they followed him to the door. But just before he stepped out of the classroom, Bakugo paused and looked over his shoulder. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Izuku slowly turned his head. Bakugo's eyes were dead, devoid of any humanity. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. The words hung in the air. Silence descended upon the classroom. Izuku froze. His pupils dilated. The breath caught in his throat. Take a swan dive off the roof. It was the ultimate cruelty. The final, devastating blow to a decade of suffering. Bakugo hadn't just insulted him. He had told him his life was completely, utterly worthless. In the mindscape, the heavy iron chains wrapping around the cage groaned. The water boiled violently, turning to steam. He crossed the line. Kurama's voice was no longer mocking. It was a terrifying, absolute promise of death. I will not let a vessel of mine be spoken to like this. Open the gate, Izuku. I will paint the walls with his blood. For the first time in 10 years, Izuku didn't immediately say no. A dark, twisting knot of pure hatred formed in his stomach. He looked at Bakugo's retreating back. He imagined it. He imagined the red chakra exploding from his body. He imagined the raw, unrivaled physical power surging through his muscles. He could cross the room in a fraction of a second. He could grab Bakugo by the throat. He could watch the arrogance melt from those crimson eyes, replaced by absolute, paralyzing terror. The whisker marks on Izuku's face flared pitch black. His fingernails elongated, sharpening into jagged claws. His green eyes flashed a brilliant, demonic red. Bakugo, sensing a sudden, horrifying drop in the air pressure, stopped in the doorway. He glanced back, a sudden, inexplicable chill running down his spine. Izuku glared at him. For a split second, Bakugo didn't see Deku. He saw a massive, looming shadow superimposed over the boy, a demon with 9 swirling tails and eyes that promised infinite suffering. Bakugo flinched, taking a subconscious step back, his breath hitching. Izuku raised his hand, the red chakra beginning to bubble across his knuckles. Just a little, Izuku thought, the darkness clouding his judgment. Just enough to show him. But then, an image flashed in his mind. Fear not, citizens. Hope has arrived. The golden, smiling face of All Might. The man who saved people. The man who brought light to the darkness. If Izuku attacked now, he wouldn't be a hero. He would be a villain. He would be proving the doctor right, proving Bakugo right, and proving Kurama right. He would be submitting to the darkness. Izuku slammed his eyes shut, biting his lips so hard it bled. He dug his sharpened nails into his own palms, using the physical pain to anchor himself to reality. No! Izuku roared in his mindscape, his mental avatar slamming his hands against the iron bars of the cage. I will not be a monster! Go back! The red chakra hissed, fighting against his will, but Izuku's mental fortitude, forged through 10 years of constant struggle, held strong. He forced the energy back into the seal. His nails returned to normal, the red faded from his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was just Izuku Midoriya. A quirkless, 14-year-old boy. Bakugo, shaking off the sudden terror and convincing himself he had imagined the demonic aura, scowled. What are you looking at, Deku? He snapped, though his voice lacked its usual explosive confidence. Izuku didn't say a word. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his hands clenched by his sides. Bakugo clicked his tongue, turning away and marching down the hall, his lackeys hurrying after him. Once they were gone, Izuku let out a ragged gasp, collapsing into his chair. His body ached. The adrenaline crash left him feeling hollow and exhausted. "You are a coward," Kurama spat, though the fox sounded tired as well. "You had him. You could have made him suffer." "Heroes don't make people suffer, Kurama," Izuku whispered aloud to the empty classroom. "I'm not going to kill Katsuki. I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to save people." He stood up, grabbing his yellow backpack, and walked out of the classroom. He took the long way down to the courtyard, walking past the koi pond. There, floating in the water and being nibbled on by the fish, was his ruined notebook. "That's not fish food, guys," Izuku sighed, reaching into the water and pulling the sodden, burnt book out. "That's my notebook." He shook the water off, looking at the charred cover. Despite the pain in his chest, despite the cruelty of the world, and despite the literal demon whispering murder into his ear, Izuku Midoriya refused to break. He clutched the ruined notebook to his chest and began the long walk home. He had to take a detour today. He wanted to avoid the main streets where Bakugo might be lingering. He decided to take the route under the overpass. It was darker, quieter, and out of the way. As he walked, Izuku looked up at the gray sky, mimicking All Might's laugh in a pathetic, shaky attempt to cheer himself up. Ha ha ha! He stepped into the shadows of the tunnel beneath the bridge. The air was cool and damp. "Izuku." Kurama's voice suddenly cut through his thoughts. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't angry. It was sharp, alert, and laced with a sudden, primal tension. "What is it?" Izuku asked, pausing his steps. "Move. Now." Before Izuku could react, before he could even turn his head, a sickening, squelching sound echoed from the manhole cover behind him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. A wet, gurgling voice hissed. Izuku spun around. Rising from the sewers, entirely composed of putrid, dark green sludge, was a massive villain. Giant, manic eyes rolled in the sludge, fixing themselves on Izuku with terrifying predatory glee. "You'll do perfectly," the sludge villain sneered, lunging forward like a tidal wave. Izuku didn't have time to scream. The sludge slammed into him, knocking him to the ground and instantly forcing its way up his nose and into his mouth. The smell was abominable, like rotting garbage and raw sewage. Izuku thrashed wildly, his hands tearing at the sludge, but his fingers just slipped through the liquid mass. "Don't worry," the villain purred, forcing more sludge down Izuku's throat, cutting off his air supply. "I'm just hijacking your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds, then, it'll all be over." Panic, pure and unadulterated, seized Izuku. His lungs burned. His vision began to darken around the edges. He was suffocating. He was dying. Inside the mindscape, the water erupted into a violent tsunami. Kurama slammed against the iron bars, his eyes blazing like supernovas in the dark. "Brat!" Kurama roared, the sheer panic in the beast's voice echoing through Izuku's fading consciousness. "Fight back! If you die, I die. Let me out. Let me incinerate him." Izuku's hands weakly clawed at the sludge. He was losing strength. The world was fading to black. I can't. Izuku thought weakly. "Do it!" Kurama bellowed, extending a massive, clawed hand through the bars, offering a dense, swirling sphere of pure red chakra. "Take the power! Survive!" For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't reject the fox's power out of principle. He reached for it out of desperation. But just as his mental hand was about to grasp the red chakra, just as the seal was about to break, clang! The manhole cover flew into the air, spinning like a coin before clattering violently against the tunnel wall. A massive shadow fell over the tunnel entrance. A figure stood there, backlit by the afternoon sun, exuding an aura of absolute, undeniable power. "Have no fear, you're safe." A booming, larger-than-life voice echoed through the tunnel. The sludge villain froze, its manic eyes widening in sheer terror. Izuku, his vision blurring, weakly turned his head toward the light. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man stepped forward, pulling his arm back. The air around him seemed to warp under the sheer pressure of his physical strength. "Now that I am here." In the mindscape, Kurama froze, his massive red eyes narrowing as he sensed an entirely different kind of power radiating from the newcomer. A power that felt ancient, but fundamentally different from chakra. It felt like blinding, golden sunlight. Texas. The giant man roared, throwing his fist forward. Smash! The wind pressure generated from the single punch was like a localized hurricane. The shockwave hit the sludge villain, instantly blasting the liquid body apart into a million splattering drops. The sheer force of the wind tore the sludge out of Izuku's lungs, allowing him to gasp for sweet, desperately needed air. Izuku hit the concrete floor, coughing violently, his chest heaving as he stared up at the impossible figure standing over him. Two massive pillars of legs. A bright white t-shirt. A blinding, fearless smile. All Might. Izuku thought, his mind reeling from oxygen deprivation and shock. Who? Kurama rumbled in Izuku's mind, a mixture of awe and immediate hostility in his voice. Who in the nine hells is this obnoxious buffoon? Izuku couldn't answer. The edges of his vision finally collapsed, and the boy with the demon fox in his soul faded into unconsciousness at the feet of the symbol of peace. Slap. 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 Hey! Wake up! Thought we lost you there. The voice was entirely too loud. It resonated in Izuku's skull like a struck gong, rattling his teeth and vibrating down his spine. He groaned, his eyelids fluttering open as his sensory inputs slowly rebooted. The smell of raw sewage and burnt ozone lingered heavily in the air, but the paralyzing suffocation was gone. Instead, filling his entire field of vision, was a face with impossible angles, deeply shadowed cheekbones, and a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. Izuku screamed, scrambling backward on the concrete like a startled crab. Ah! Good! You're awake! All Might boomed, planting his hands on his massive hips. He looked exactly like he did on the computer screen, a towering monument of red, white, blue, and gold muscle. I was worried I'd hit you a little too hard with that wind pressure. My apologies. I'm not used to operating in these tight city sewers. The collateral damage can be a bit tricky to manage. Izuku couldn't breathe. But this time, it wasn't because his lungs were filled with villainous sludge. It was because the literal god of his universe was standing not 5 feet away from him, laughing heartily. Inside the mindscape, a completely different reaction was taking place. What is this obnoxious noise? Kurama snarled, his massive red eyes snapping open in the dark cavern. He dragged his colossal claws against the iron bars of the cage, sending sparks flying into the shallow water. Is this the man who interrupted my kill? He radiates an insufferable, blinding energy. It makes my fur stand on end. Tell him to cease his ridiculous smiling, Izuku, or I will melt his face off. Shut up, shut up, shut up! Izuku thought back, his mental voice entirely consumed by hysterical fanboy panic. That's All Might. He's the #1 hero. He's the symbol of peace. He is a loud buffoon in a spandex suit, Kurama deadpanned. Then, the giant fox paused, sniffing the air of the mindscape. His slit eyes narrowed in sudden, predatory interest. Wait, something is wrong with him. Beneath that blinding aura. I smell rot. I smell blood. The man is a walking corpse. Izuku didn't hear the fox's assessment. His physical body was too busy hyperventilating. He frantically patted his pockets, his eyes darting around the tunnel. An autograph. I need an autograph. Where's my... His eyes landed on his burnt, soggy hero analysis for the future notebook lying open on the ground. He snatched it up. There, spread across 2 full pages in thick, bold marker, was All Might's signature. He already signed it. Izuku shrieked, bowing so deeply and so rapidly his forehead nearly cracked against the concrete. Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom. I'll pass it down for generations. Ha! Excellent. All Might gave a thumbs up, though his eyes darted toward the exit of the tunnel. He held up 2 large plastic soda bottles. Inside, the dark green sludge villain was swirling angrily, completely contained. Well, I must be off. I have to get this fellow to the authorities so they can put him in a proper cell. Wait, Izuku stammered, his heart sinking. Already? But... I have so many questions. Pros are constantly battling time and enemies. All Might declared, stretching his massive legs. He crouched down, the air pressure around him instantly shifting, pulling the loose debris in the tunnel toward him. Well then, I'm counting on your continued support. All Might kicked off. The force of his jump shattered the concrete beneath his boots, creating a shockwave that kicked up a cloud of dust. He shot out of the tunnel, and into the sky like a surface-to-air missile. But as the wind rushed past him, All Might felt an unexpected, dragging weight on his right leg. He looked down, his heroic smile faltering into a look of absolute bewilderment. There, clinging to his pant leg for dear life, his face flapping violently in the wind pressure, was the green-haired middle schooler. Hey, hey, hey! All Might yelled over the roar of the wind. What do you think you're doing? Let go! Your fanaticism is too much. If I let go now, I'll die! Izuku screamed, his eyes rolling back in his head as the ground rapidly shrank to the size of a patchwork quilt beneath them. Inside the seal, Kurama was entirely losing his mind. Are you insane? The nine-tailed fox roared, thrashing against the bars. You incompetent ape! Let go! No, don't let go! If you fall, I will possess your shattered corpse just to kill this blonde idiot myself. All Might realized the boy had a point. He sighed, reaching down and grabbing the back of Izuku's uniform collar, pulling him up so he wouldn't be torn away by the G-force. Fine, fine. Just close your eyes and hold your breath. A few agonizing moments later, they landed with a heavy, metallic thud on the roof of a 3-story office building. Izuku collapsed onto his hands and knees, kissing the fiberglass roofing, his entire body shaking violently. I'm alive. I'm alive. Never do that again, Kurama growled, his voice tight. I swear by the sage, if you pull a stunt like that again, I will burn your nervous system from the inside out. Good grief, All Might sighed, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. If you talk to the people downstairs, they'll help you down. I seriously am out of time, so I must be going. Wait! Izuku cried out, scrambling to his feet. He reached a hand out, his chest heaving. Please! Just one question. All Might didn't stop. He walked toward the edge of the roof, his back to the boy. No! I will not wait. Can someone without a quirk be like you? The words tore out of Izuku's throat with the force of a physical blow. It was the question that had haunted him for 10 years. It was the question he had asked his mother, the question he had asked the uncaring sky, the question he fought Kurama over every single day. All Might stopped. His massive boots ground to a halt against the rooftop. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, the dam holding back his insecurities finally breaking. People think I don't have a quirk. They bully me for it. They tell me I'm worthless, that I should just take a swan dive off a roof. But I want to save people. I want to be a fearless hero who saves everyone with a smile, just like you. Inside the mindscape, the heavy, dark waters fell completely still. Kurama stopped thrashing. The ancient beast moved to the front of the cage, pressing his massive, furred face against the iron bars, listening intently. Ask him, Izuku, Kurama whispered, a dark, sinister purr echoing in the boy's mind. Ask your idol? Let us hear what the symbol of peace has to say about the weak. Let him shatter your delusions so we can finally get to work. Izuku opened his eyes, staring at All Might's broad, invincible back. But All Might wasn't moving. In fact, steam was beginning to pour off the hero's body. A thick, white vapor hissed from his pores, cloaking him in a dense cloud. Izuku blinked. All Might? A wet, hacking cough echoed from the smoke. As the vapor cleared, Izuku let out a choked scream. Standing where the mountain of muscle had been was a skeletal, emaciated man. His clothes hung off his frail frame like a scarecrow. His eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, hollow and shadowed. He looked incredibly sick, his sharp, angular features locked in a grimace of pain. He wiped a trail of blood from his chin. Izuku's jaw hit the floor. What? You're deflating? You're a fake. You're an imposter. So thin. I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, his voice completely stripped of its booming bravado. It was quiet, raspy, and tired. He sat down heavily against the rooftop railing, pulling up the hem of his oversized white t-shirt. Izuku gasped. Covering the entire left side of All Might's chest and abdomen was a massive, twisting vortex of purple and red scar tissue. It looked like the epicenter of a horrific explosion, a wound so deep and agonizing it was a miracle the man was even breathing. In the mindscape, Kurama let out a cruel, booming laugh. Ha! I told you! I smelled the rot on him. The fox slammed a paw against the water in amusement. The golden god is hollow. Look at him, Izuku. This is your idol, a dying, broken man wearing a mask of false strength. An injury I got from an enemy attack 5 years ago, All Might explained, his hollow eyes staring at the sky. Half of my respiratory organs were destroyed, and I lost my entire stomach. I've become emaciated from repeated surgeries. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I look like this. Izuku was paralyzed. 5 years ago, was that your fight with Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might chuckled weakly. But no. That punk couldn't bring me down. This fight wasn't made public to the world. I asked that it not be made public. A symbol of peace who saves people with a smile must never be daunted by evil. All Might looked at Izuku, his sunken blue eyes carrying a weight that felt heavier than the world itself. I smiled to hide the fear inside, All Might confessed softly. It's a brave face I put on when the pressure is high. This job, it isn't a game. Pros are always risking their lives. The wind howled across the desolate rooftop. So, you're asking if you can be a hero without a quirk? All Might said, looking back at the scarred tissue on his chest. He slowly lowered his shirt. I cannot simply say, you can do it even without power. Izuku felt the ground drop out from beneath him. The words hit him harder than Bakugo's explosions. They hit him harder than Dr. Tsubasa's diagnosis 10 years ago. Because this wasn't a bully. This wasn't a doctor. This was All Might. The ultimate authority on heroism. If you want to save people, you can become a police officer, All Might continued, standing up and heavily walking toward the roof access door. They get mocked because villains are delivered to their doorstep, but it is a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, kid. But you also have to consider what's realistic. The heavy metal door opened, then clicked shut. All Might was gone. Izuku stood completely alone on the rooftop. The silence was deafening. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bleeding streaks of orange and red across the city skyline. His notebook, bearing the signature of the man who had just crushed his soul, felt like lead in his hand. Izuku dropped to his knees. He didn't cry. He was too empty to cry. It felt as though his heart had been scooped out of his chest with a jagged spoon. Inside the mindscape, the environment shifted. The water drained away, leaving dry, cracked stone. The cage bars dissolved into the shadows, and Kurama stepped entirely out into the open. The colossal nine-tailed fox loomed over Izuku's tiny mental avatar, its red eyes glowing in the dark. For once, Kurama didn't mock him. He didn't laugh. He simply laid his massive head down on his crossed paws, looking at the broken boy. Do you see now, Izuku? Kurama's voice was remarkably soft, devoid of its usual grinding malice. It was the voice of an ancient being who had seen this exact scenario play out 1,000 times over 1,000 years. This is the reality of your world. The strong dictate the truth. The golden hero you worship just told you that you are nothing without power. Izuku stared blankly ahead. He's right. I'm quirkless. I'm just Deku. You are not quirkless, Kurama corrected him, a hint of his pride flaring. You have me. You have the power to level mountains. You have the power to make the man who just broke your heart beg for mercy. A wisp of red chakra materialized in front of Izuku's mental avatar. It didn't burn this time. It felt warm, like a heavy blanket on a freezing night. Stop fighting me, child, Kurama whispered, the red energy wrapping around Izuku's shoulders. Let go of this foolish dream. You owe this society nothing. They have given you nothing but pain. Let me take the wheel. I will give you the strength to take whatever you want. Izuku looked at the red aura. For 10 years he had treated it as a curse. A vile, demonic influence trying to ruin his life. But right now, it was the only thing offering him a way out of the abyss. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Izuku reached his hand up to touch the red chakra. Boom! A massive, earth-shattering explosion rocked the city, pulling Izuku out of his mindscape and violently back into reality. Izuku jumped, looking over the edge of the roof. Several blocks away, in the heart of the shopping district, a massive plume of thick black smoke was rising into the twilight sky. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, cutting through the evening air. A villain attack? Izuku thought, his legs moving on autopilot. He hurried down the stairs of the office building, his mind a chaotic mess of grief, All Might's words, and Kurama's seductive offer. He didn't want to go watch a hero fight. He didn't want to take notes. He just wanted to go home, crawl into his bed, and never wake up. Yet, his feet dragged him toward the smoke. It was an ingrained habit, a moth drawn to a flame. When he finally pushed through the growing crowd of onlookers, his breath hitched in his throat. The shopping district was a war zone. Fires raged out of control, licking the sides of buildings and shattering glass windows. The pro-heroes, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, and Empty Lady, were standing on the periphery, looking completely helpless. But what made Izuku's blood run cold was the villain in the center of the destruction. It was a towering, writhing mass of dark green sludge. The sludge villain. Izuku clamped his hands over his mouth, his eyes wide with absolute horror. How? All Might captured him. He had him in the bottles. Then, a sickening memory flashed in his mind. When I grabbed All Might's leg, he dropped the bottles. It's my fault, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. I did this. Excellent, Kurama mused darkly in his mind. The loud buffoon lost his prey because of you. Let the heroes deal with it. Turn around and walk away, Izuku. Izuku watched as Death Arms tried to punch the villain, only to get his fist stuck in the sludge. Empty Lady couldn't enter the narrow street because of her size. Kamui Woods was useless against the roaring fires. The pros were just standing there, waiting for someone with a better quirk to arrive. They're waiting, Izuku realized, his heart pounding against his ribs. They're just watching. I can't get close. Death Arms yelled over the roar of the flames. Does the kid have a death wish? He's causing all these explosions. Kid? Izuku's eyes darted to the center of the sludge. Trapped inside the suffocating mass of green liquid, struggling with an intense, violent fury, was a boy with ash-blonde hair. Bakugo. He was firing off explosions in every direction, desperate to free himself. But it was only feeding the fires and creating more chaos. The sludge was forcing its way into his mouth, his nose, choking the life out of him. Izuku stared at Katsuki Bakugo. The boy who had tormented him for 10 years. The boy who had burned his notebook. The boy who had told him to kill himself just a few hours ago. Bakugo stopped thrashing for a split second. His crimson eyes, usually so full of arrogance and hatred, darted toward the crowd. They locked onto Izuku's wide, terrified green eyes. In that single, infinitesimal moment, Bakugo wasn't a bully. He wasn't a monster. He was a victim begging for help. Let him die, Kurama commanded, his voice cold and absolute. He deserves it. The sludge will take his body, and we will finally be rid of him. Izuku didn't hear the fox. He didn't hear the crowd. He didn't hear the roaring flames. Before he could process what was happening, before his brain could rationalize the danger, his body moved. He burst out of the crowd, slipping past the police barricade, and sprinted full speed into the inferno. Hey! Stop! You idiot! You'll die! Death Arms roared, reaching out, but his fingers only grazed the back of Izuku's uniform. Inside the mindscape, Kurama's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. For a millennia, the fox had seen humans driven by greed, by rage, by revenge. But this, running toward certain death without a shred of power, simply because someone looked at him with pleading eyes. What are you doing? Kurama screamed, the mental link vibrating with genuine panic. Stop! He told you to jump off a roof. Let him burn. My legs, they moved on their own. Izuku thought frantically as the heat of the fire blistered his face. The sludge villain turned, its manic eyes locking onto the boy charging at it. You're that brat from earlier. Bakugo, half submerged in the sludge, stared at Izuku in disbelief. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? I don't know. Izuku screamed, tears streaming down his face. My legs just moved! The villain raised a massive, tentacle-like arm of hardened sludge, pulling it back like a whip. I'll kill you! Izuku was out of time. He had no plan. He had no quirk. He was going to be smashed into a bloody paste on the pavement. In the darkest depths of his soul, a shift occurred. For 10 years, whenever Izuku had felt Kurama's chakra, it had been a response to anger. It had been fueled by hatred, by the desire to hurt those who hurt him. And because of that, Izuku had always locked it away, terrified of becoming a monster. But right now, in this fraction of a second, Izuku wasn't angry. He didn't want to hurt the sludge villain. He didn't want revenge on Bakugo. He just wanted to save him. A microscopic crack formed in the intricate seal holding the nine-tailed fox. It wasn't a crack born of rage. It was a crack born of sheer, desperate need. Take it! Kurama roared, slamming both of his massive, chakra-infused paws against the iron gate. A single drop of crimson energy leaked through the seal. In the physical world, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku reached behind him, grabbing the strap of his yellow backpack. As he pulled it forward to throw it, a sudden, explosive heat surged through his right arm. It wasn't the agonizing, burning sensation he was used to when fighting the fox's influence. This felt different. It felt precise. A flickering, bubbling aura of red energy erupted around Izuku's right forearm. It crackled like blood-red lightning, emitting a high-pitched hissing sound that cut through the roar of the flames. The 6 whisker marks on Izuku's cheeks suddenly darkened, turning pitch black, and his emerald eyes flashed with a brief, terrifying slit-red hue. Izuku didn't even realize he was channeling the power. His singular focus was Bakugo. He hurled the backpack. Normally, a 14-year-old boy throwing a bag full of textbooks would do little more than annoy a villain of this size. But fueled by a fraction of a drop of Kurama's ancient chakra, the backpack broke the sound barrier. Crack! A sonic boom echoed down the street as the heavy canvas bag ripped through the air, completely blurring out of sight. It slammed directly into the sludge villain's massive right eye with the force of a speeding freight train. The villain shrieked in absolute agony, the force of the blow so immense that the entire top half of its liquid body was violently blown backward. The sludge holding Bakugo shattered like glass, loosening its grip. Bakugo gasped, violently hacking up green liquid, his airways finally clear. The crowd, the heroes, and even All Might, who was hiding behind a telephone pole in his skeletal form, clutching his bleeding side, stared in stunned silence. Izuku didn't stop. He closed the distance, his hands plunging directly into the corrosive sludge. Kaken! Izuku screamed, digging his fingers in and pulling. The red aura that had briefly coated his arm faded the instant the backpack left his hand, returning him to a normal, powerless boy. The sludge reformed quickly, grabbing Izuku's wrists and burning his skin. Why are you here? Bakugo yelled, coughing violently. Izuku looked at him, tears streaming down his soot-covered face, a brilliant, fearless smile breaking through his terror. You looked like you were asking for help. The words struck Bakugo like a physical blow. They struck All Might too. Behind the telephone pole, the skeletal hero felt a surge of profound shame. Pathetic, All Might thought, gripping the fabric of his shirt over his scar. I told him to be realistic. I told him he couldn't be a hero. And yet, the only one out there acting like one, is him. A fire ignited in All Might's hollow chest. It wasn't the fire of One for All. It was the fire of inspiration. Damn it! The sludge villain roared, fully recovering and raising 2 massive liquid tendrils to crush both boys at once. I'm going to blast you both to pieces. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact. But it never came. A violent, localized tornado erupted in the center of the street. The flames were instantly snuffed out by the sheer lack of oxygen. Izuku opened his eyes. Standing over him, gripping the 2 sludge tendrils with hands that looked like they were carved from marble, was All Might. Blood was leaking from the corner of the number 1 hero's mouth, but his smile was back, more radiant and terrifying than ever. I really am pathetic, All Might boomed, his voice echoing off the buildings. I told you what it takes to be a hero, but I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives to put their money where their mouth is. All Might! The villain screamed, lunging forward. All Might pulled his right arm back. The muscles bulged to grotesque, impossible proportions, steam hissing from his skin. Detroit. All Might roared, his eyes glowing in the shadow of his brow. Smash! He threw the punch. He didn't even hit the villain directly. He hit the air. The resulting shockwave was apocalyptic. The wind pressure sheared the sludge villain into a fine mist, splattering the liquid across a 3-block radius. The force of the blow was so intense it created an updraft, gathering the smoke and clouds above the city into a massive, swirling vortex. Seconds later, it began to rain. All Might had punched the air so hard, he changed the weather. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. The pro-heroes stood in absolute awe. Izuku sat on the wet pavement, completely drenched by the sudden downpour, staring at the man who had just saved his life for the second time today. As All Might stood tall, soaking in the praise, his blue eyes flicked down to Izuku. He noticed the red burn marks on the boy's wrists from the sludge. But he also remembered the blur of motion, the impossible, cannon-like force behind a thrown backpack, and the briefest, faintest flicker of bubbling red energy that had coated the boy's arm. What was that? All Might wondered, his smile remaining fixed. I thought he said he was quirkless. The aftermath was exactly what one would expect. The pro-heroes descended upon the boys once the villain was securely collected in new bottles. Kamui Woods and Death Arms immediately pulled Izuku aside and began scolding him relentlessly. What were you thinking, kid? That was incredibly reckless. Death Arms barked, pointing a stern finger at Izuku's chest. You have no quirk. You could have gotten yourself and the hostage killed. Leave the hero work to the professionals. Izuku bowed his head, accepting the reprimand. I'm sorry. I know. On the other side of the street, Empty Lady and several paramedics were fussing over Bakugo. You were amazing, kid! Empty Lady praised, placing a hand on Bakugo's shoulder. That quirk of yours is incredibly powerful. Once you graduate, you should definitely look into my agency. Bakugo didn't look at her. He sat on the back of the ambulance, a towel draped over his shoulders, glaring at the ground. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. An hour later, the scene was cleared, and the sun had completely set, giving way to a cool, starry night. Izuku was walking home alone, his ruined notebook tucked under his arm. His body ached, his clothes smelled like sewage and smoke, and he was mentally exhausted. Inside the mindscape, it was unusually quiet. Kurama? Izuku called out tentatively. A low rumble vibrated in the dark water. What? Thank you, Izuku thought, his mental voice soft. For the power. You saved us. Kurama let out a disdainful snort. Do not flatter yourself, brat. I lent you my chakra because your death would have inconvenienced me. Furthermore, you utilized it completely wrong. You threw a bag. Had you fully opened the gate, I could have turned that pathetic slime creature into ash. I didn't want to kill him, Izuku replied. I just wanted to save Kaken. And your power felt different this time. It didn't feel angry. The nine-tailed fox fell silent. Deep within the cage, Kurama's eyes narrowed. The boy was right. For the first time, his chakra hadn't been pulled through the seal by malice or hatred. It had been pulled by a selfless desire to protect. It was a bizarre, alien sensation that the ancient beast didn't know how to process. Do not expect it to happen again, Kurama finally growled, turning his back to the bars and laying down in the shadows. The next time you draw upon me, it will be to destroy. Izuku smiled faintly. Sure, Kurama. Deku. Izuku stopped, turning around. Running down the empty street, panting heavily, was Bakugo. Izuku tensed up, expecting an explosion, but Bakugo stopped a few feet away, his chest heaving. Listen here, you quirkless nerd! Bakugo yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He pointed an aggressive finger at Izuku, but his eyes were wide and frantic. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't need your help, got it? I was completely fine on my own. You didn't save me. Don't you dare think you can look down on me. I'm the best. I'm going to UA. Bakugo spun on his heel and marched away, his shoulders stiff. Izuku blinked, thoroughly confused. Did he come all the way over here just to yell at me for saving him? He's a complicated guy, Izuku muttered to himself, turning back around to resume his walk home. I am here! Izuku shrieked as All Might suddenly burst out from an alleyway, striking a dramatic pose under the street lamp. All Might? Izuku yelled, looking around frantically. Why are you here? How did you get past the reporters? Ha! Escaping reporters is a breeze for me. All Might boomed. After all, I am the number one, bleg. Mid-laugh, All Might violently deflated, coughing up a terrifying amount of blood. He reverted back to his skeletal, gaunt form, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. Izuku recoiled. Hey, are you okay? I'm fine, All Might sighed, leaning against the brick wall of the alley. His hollow blue eyes fixed on Izuku, and his expression turned incredibly serious. Young man. I came here to thank you, and to apologize. Izuku froze. If you hadn't been there, if I hadn't heard your story, All Might said, stepping forward, I would have been nothing but a bystander in a crowd, watching a boy die. You saved me from making a terrible mistake. No! Izuku protested, waving his hands frantically. It was my fault in the first place. I got in your way. I'm the reason the villain escaped. Maybe, All Might conceded softly. But out of all the people at the scene, the pro-heroes, the police, and myself, you were the only one who acted. A timid, quirkless boy was the only one who stepped off the sidewalk. All Might stopped a few feet away from Izuku. He looked down at the boy, his gaze piercing through all of Izuku's insecurities, fears, and doubts. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days, All Might said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the immense, solemn weight of a legend. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku's breath hitched. Tears instantly welled in his eyes. That was true for you today, wasn't it? Izuku clamped a hand over his mouth, the tears spilling over his cheeks. He fell to his knees, his entire body shaking with violent sobs. For 10 years, he had waited for someone, anyone, to say those words to him. He had waited for his mother to say them. He had begged the universe for a chance. You can become a hero, All Might declared. Izuku wailed, bowing his head to the concrete, sobbing until his throat was raw. Inside the mindscape, Kurama watched the scene unfold. The fox remained silent, but a strange, unreadable emotion flickered in his massive red eyes. All Might waited patiently for the boy to cry it out. When Izuku finally looked up, wiping his snot-nosed face, All Might held out a hand. I deem you worthy of my power, All Might said, his eyes burning with an intense blue light. My quirk is yours to inherit. Izuku blinked, utterly dumbfounded. Huh! Ha! What's with that face? All Might laughed, his gaunt features morphing into a skeleton-like grin. It's a proposal. I'm asking if you want to accept my power. I'm talking about my quirk, boy. But... Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet. You can't just give someone a quirk. That's scientifically impossible. Quirks are genetic. They're tied to DNA and physical mutations. I've read every medical journal on the subject. Stop with the nerd mumble. All Might interrupted, holding up a hand. I hide a lot of things from the public. My true form, my injury. But the biggest secret I hide is the nature of my quirk. All Might held out his hand, palm up. Even in his skeletal form, a faint, golden light seemed to shimmer over his skin, radiating an aura of absolute righteousness and warmth. My quirk was passed down to me, like a sacred torch, All Might explained reverently. It is the crystallized power of past generations, the ability to stockpile power, and the ability to transfer it to another. I call it one for all. One for all. Izuku whispered, mesmerized by the invisible golden warmth radiating from the man. Inside the mindscape, Kurama recoiled violently. The water hissed and boiled. Do not touch it! Kurama snarled, his lips pulling back to reveal row after row of razor-sharp teeth. That power, it smells of 100 different souls. It is a blinding, righteous poison. If you let that golden filth into our vessel, I will tear it to shreds. I have been looking for a successor for a long time, All Might continued, completely unaware of the demonic panic happening inside the boy's head. And then I saw you, a boy with no power, but with more heroism than any pro on that street. But before we go any further, All Might's gaze sharpened, dropping to Izuku's wrists, then to the boy's face. When you threw that bag, young man? All Might asked, his voice careful, probing. I saw a red light. And your throw, it hit the villain with the force of a low-tier strength quirk. Are you absolutely certain you are quirkless? Izuku froze. The wind blew down the empty street, rattling a nearby trash can. Izuku looked down at his hands. He thought about kurama. He thought about the red chakra, the hatred, the malice, and the sheer destructive power chained inside his soul. If he told All Might the truth, that he was harboring a literal demon that wanted to slaughter humanity, would All Might take the offer back? Would the symbol of peace view him as a threat? Tell him nothing, Kurama warned darkly. Izuku swallowed hard. He looked up, meeting All Might's eyes with a steady, unwavering gaze. I don't have a quirk, Izuku said, deciding to bend the truth to save his dream. The doctor diagnosed me as quirkless at age 4. The red light. It must have been a reflection from the fire. All Might stared at him for a long moment. He was no fool. He knew the boy was hiding something. But he also knew what he had seen in the boy's eyes when he charged the sludge villain. The heart of a hero cannot be faked. Very well, All Might said, his skeletal smile returning. So, what will it be? Will you accept my power, young Midoriya? Izuku didn't hesitate. He wiped his eyes, stood up straight, and clenched his fists. Yes. An immediate reply. I expected nothing less. All Might laughed. But it won't be easy. Your body is currently an unbaked vessel. If I forced one for all into you now, your limbs would pop off and you'd explode. Izuku paled. Explode? Which is why we have 10 months before the UA entrance exam, All Might said, his eyes gleaming with a manic, trainer's glint. Meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park tomorrow at 6 a.m. sharp. Your hellish training begins then. All Might turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Izuku stood under the street lamp, his heart soaring into the stratosphere. He was going to be a hero. He was going to train under All Might. But as he walked the rest of the way home, a heavy, ominous dread settled in his stomach. He had a demon of pure hatred chained to his soul. And he had just agreed to ingest a power made of pure, crystallized heroism. Inside the mindscape, Kurama paced back and forth behind the iron bars, his red eyes burning with a furious, unyielding light. You play a dangerous game, brat, the nine-tailed fox whispered into the dark. 2 gods cannot occupy the same temple. When that golden power enters this space, there will be war. The alarm clock did not ring. It didn't have the chance. At exactly 4:45 a.m., a full 15 minutes before the digital numbers on his nightstand were set to blare, Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. The room was bathed in the cold, blue-gray pre-dawn light. The world outside his window was completely silent, save for the distant, lonely rumble of a delivery truck navigating the sleeping streets of Mizurifu. Izuku lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom ache in his muscles from a workout that hadn't even begun yet. You are awake. The voice in his head was not a morning voice. It did not carry the groggy, slow timbre of someone who had just roused from slumber. Kurama's voice was, as always, a deep, grinding tectonic rumble that vibrated against the inside of Izuku's skull, sharp and entirely too alert. Yeah, Izuku thought back, slowly peeling the All Might blanket off his body. Today's the day. The training starts. You are going to a garbage dump to haul scrap metal for a skeletal buffoon who spits blood every time he laughs, the nine-tailed fox deadpanned. Forgive me if I do not share your boundless enthusiasm. It's not just scrap metal, Kurama. It's strength training. He's going to make me a proper vessel. Izuku swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. He walked over to his mirror, turning on the small desk lamp. The harsh yellow light illuminated his reflection. He was 14 years old, incredibly scrawny, with pale skin, a mop of unruly green hair, and zero muscle definition. He looked exactly like what he was, a boy who had spent his entire life running away from bullies and hiding behind a notebook. And then there were his cheeks. The 6 whisker marks, 3 on each side, were stark against his pale skin. They weren't scars. They were a brand. The mark of the beast chained to his soul. You already have a vessel, brat, Kurama snarled softly, the red chakra in the mindscape giving a restless churn. You have me. If you simply opened the gate, I would flood your pathetic musculature with enough chakra to shatter steel. You do not need to pull rusty refrigerators through the sand to gain power. You already hold the greatest power on this miserable planet. We've been over this, Izuku replied stubbornly, pulling on a plain white t-shirt and his red sneakers. I'm not taking the easy way out. I'm not using your power to skip the hard work. If I'm going to hold All Might's quirk, my body has to be strong enough to handle it on its own. Kurama scoffed, a sound like a localized earthquake. 2 powers in one body. You are courting death, Izuku Midoriya. When that golden filth tries to force its way into my domain, do not cry to me when your nervous system burns to ash. Izuku ignored the threat, grabbing his yellow backpack and silently slipping out of his apartment so as not to wake his mother. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint, salty tang of the nearby ocean. Izuku jogged through the empty streets, the rhythmic slapping of his sneakers against the pavement the only sound for miles. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running away from something. He was running toward a future he had actually chosen. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a tragedy. Decades ago, it had been a pristine coastline, famous for its white sands and beautiful sunsets. Now, it was a monument to human laziness. The beach was entirely buried beneath literal mountains of illegal dumping. Refrigerators, rusted cars, broken washing machines, tires, shattered glass, and rotting furniture formed a jagged, metallic labyrinth that stretched for miles along the shoreline. The smell was atrocious, a putrid blend of rusting iron, rotting seaweed, and stagnant water. Standing at the edge of the concrete seawall, looking out over the sea of garbage, was a skeletal figure in an oversized white t-shirt and baggy cargo pants. Ah! Young Midoriya! You're early! All Might coughed, a small spatter of blood landing on the concrete. He quickly wiped it away with a handkerchief, his sunken blue eyes gleaming with an intense, manic energy. Good morning, All Might! Izuku panted, coming to a halt and bowing deeply. Inside the mindscape, Kurama groaned. By the sage, he is so loud. It is 5 in the morning. Does the man lack an indoor voice? All Might turned to face the ocean of trash, gesturing to it with a sweep of his bony arm. Behold! Your training ground. Dagoba Beach, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Well, mostly just scum and illegal dumping. Because of the sea currents, anything dropped in the ocean ends up right here. It's a localized disaster. Izuku stepped up to the railing, looking down at the immense piles of garbage. I've read about this place online. The city tried to clean it up a few times, but it just costs too much money, and people keep dumping stuff at night. Exactly. All Might suddenly puffed up, steam violently exploding from his pores. In a fraction of a second, the skeletal man was replaced by the towering, muscle-bound behemoth that the world knew as the symbol of peace. And that is where you come in, my boy! All Might boomed, flexing his massive biceps. The sheer wind pressure from his flex knocked an empty soda can off the railing. Kurama's mental voice spiked with immediate, furious irritation. Tell him to stop doing that. His energy signature fluctuates so wildly it gives me a migraine, and tell him to lower his voice before I tear his vocal cords out. Izuku winced slightly, rubbing his temple to soothe the fox's irritation. So, I'm going to clean the beach? You are going to restore the beach. All Might corrected, pulling a thick, rolled-up stack of papers from his back pocket. He unrolled it and shoved it into Izuku's chest. This is the aim to pass, American Dream Plan. I created it last night. It is a hyper-detailed regimen designed to push your body to its absolute limits, while simultaneously performing a great act of community service. A true hero's work. Izuku looked down at the paper. It was terrifyingly detailed. It mapped out his diet, his sleep schedule, his study hours, and the exact weight of the trash he was expected to move each day for the next 10 months. You see, young Midoriya, All Might said, his booming voice softening just a fraction, taking on the tone of a strict but caring mentor. My quirk, one for all, is the physical crystallization of power. It is a highly demanding energy. If you try to receive it now, with your fragile, unbaked limbs, All Might pause for dramatic effect. Your body would simply explode. Izuku paled, the paper trembling in his hands. He explode? He is not lying, Kurama chimed in, a dark, cynical amusement coloring the beast's voice. I can smell the density of his energy. If he forced that into your current nervous system, your bones would turn to shrapnel. Which means I would die. Which means I am highly invested in you not failing this ridiculous garbage-hauling endeavor. Exactly. All Might laughed, completely oblivious to the demonic entity seconding his medical opinion. So, we must build your vessel. We must forge a body capable of housing the power of the gods, and to do that, you are going to move every single piece of trash on this beach with your bare hands. All Might pointed a massive, accusatory finger at a rusted refrigerator sitting at the base of the nearest pile. Start with that one. Put your back into it. Izuku swallowed hard, walking down the concrete steps to the sand. He approached the refrigerator. It was covered in barnacles and smelled like death. He grabbed the heavy nylon ropes All Might had tied around it, slung them over his shoulders, and leaned forward. He pulled. Nothing happened. He dug his red sneakers into the sand, gritted his teeth, and pulled with every ounce of strength in his scrawny 14-year-old body. The ropes dug painfully into his collarbones. The sand shifted under his feet. His face turned a deep, flushed tomato red. The refrigerator moved exactly half an inch. Ha! Is that all you've got? All Might suddenly called out from above. Izuku looked back, his eyes widening in horror. All Might was sitting on top of the refrigerator, completely relaxed, adding 600 pounds of pure muscle to the load. Hey All Might! You're heavy! Izuku choked out. A hero must carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, Midoriya. All Might laughed. Now pull. Inside the mindscape, Kurama rested his chin on his giant paws, watching the pathetic display through Izuku's eyes. You look like a dung beetle rolling a ball of filth, Kurama noted dryly. Not helping. Izuku grunted mentally, his physical body screaming in agony as he managed to drag the fridge another inch. Your stance is atrocious, Kurama continued, a harsh instructor's tone bleeding into his malice. You are pulling with your lower back. You are going to snap your spine like a dry twig. Drop your hips, plant your heels, and drive the force from your legs through your core. I refuse to be bonded to a cripple. Izuku blinked, surprised by the actual, legitimate advice. He shifted his footing, dropping his center of gravity, and pushed off the sand with his thighs instead of pulling with his back. The refrigerator groaned, sliding forward a full foot. Excellent adjustment. All Might praised from his perch, giving a thumbs up. Izuku panted, sweat instantly stinging his eyes. Thanks, Kurama. Do not thank me, ape, the fox snarled defensively, retreating into the shadows of the cage. I am preserving my own existence. Nothing more. The first month was absolute, unadulterated hell. Izuku's life devolved into a relentless, agonizing cycle of exhaustion. He would wake up at 4:30 a.m., run to the beach, drag hundreds of pounds of trash until 7 a.m., sprint home to shower, and barely make it to school before the first bell. His body was a map of bruises, blisters, and rope burns. Every muscle fiber he possessed felt as though it had been soaked in battery acid. Sitting in his middle school classroom, the drone of his math teacher's voice sounded like a distant, underwater echo. Izuku's head bobbed. His eyelids weighed 1,000 pounds. Before he could stop himself, his forehead hit the desk with a soft thud. He was asleep instantly. A few desks away, Katsuki Bakugo narrowed his crimson eyes. Bakugo twirled a pencil between his fingers, his gaze locked on the sleeping form of his childhood punching bag. Something was wrong with Deku. Ever since the sludge villain incident, Deku had changed. He wasn't cowering as much. He wasn't muttering under his breath constantly. He was dead on his feet, sure, but there was a strange, manic glint in his emerald eyes, and beneath his uniform, Bakugo could see the faint outline of something he had never associated with Deku before, muscle tone. But what bothered Bakugo more than anything was the memory of the fire. The memory of the backpack tearing through the air like a cannonball. The memory of the brief, terrifying red aura that had enveloped Deku's arm. And the sudden, paralyzing chill Bakugo had felt in the classroom earlier that day. He's hiding something, Bakugo thought, his pencil snapping perfectly in half between his fingers. That quirkless loser is hiding a quirk. And he thinks he can play me for a fool. Bakugo glared at Izuku's back. I'll tear the truth out of you eventually, Deku. Back at the beach, the changing seasons marked the brutal passage of time. Months 2 through 5 saw the autumn winds turn into the bitter, biting cold of winter. The sand at Dagoba Beach froze solid, making every step treacherous. The rusted metal of the cars and washing machines burned Izuku's bare hands with the cold. All Might, wrapped in a massive winter coat in his skeletal form, watched from the seawall, drinking hot coffee from a thermos. You're falling behind the schedule, young Midoriya. All Might called out, his breath pluming in the freezing air. The American Dream Plan waits for no man. Izuku didn't answer. He couldn't. He was currently trying to drag the cab of a rusted pickup truck across the icy sand. His hands were bleeding, the skin cracked and raw. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. Inside the mindscape, the environment had subtly shifted. The water covering the floor of the sewer was no longer murky and freezing. It was clear, and it held a faint, tolerable warmth. The ambient temperature of the mindscape was directly tied to Izuku's physical and mental fortitude. As his body grew stronger, the space grew more stable, Kurama noticed. The great fox sat behind the massive iron bars, his 9 red tails swaying rhythmically behind him. He watched the boy push himself to the absolute brink of human endurance, day in and day out, without a single word of complaint. You are bleeding over the metal, Kurama observed, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. I know, Izuku thought back, his mental voice tight with exertion. Your muscles are tearing. Lactic acid is drowning your system. You are a hair's breadth from a catastrophic physical failure. I have to push harder. I'm behind schedule. Kurama's slit eyes narrowed. The fox stood up, walking to the front of the cage. He pressed his massive snout against the bars. You stubborn, foolish child, Kurama sighed, a sound that was surprisingly devoid of malice. If you destroy the vessel before the blonde buffoon gives you his power, all of this suffering will be for nothing. A faint, warm wisp of red chakra drifted through the bars. It didn't carry the suffocating killing intent or the burning rage of the Nine Tails. It was pure, raw life energy. The red wisp floated down into the water of the mindscape, instantly dissolving. In the physical world, Izuku gasped. A sudden wave of intense, comforting heat washed over his freezing body. The agonizing burn in his muscles vanished. The bleeding cracks on his knuckles sealed shut, emitting a tiny wisp of steam. His fatigue evaporated, replaced by a sudden, explosive surge of stamina. Izuku blinked, looking at his healed hands. Kurama? Did you heal me? Do not flatter yourself, Kurama snapped, violently retreating back into the darkness of the cage. I am merely patching the holes in my own prison. If you stop moving that truck, I will burn your hands myself. Now pull, ape. Izuku smiled, a genuine, warm smile. He grabbed the ropes, planted his feet, and pulled. The truck groaned, shifting heavily through the frozen sand. Thank you, Kurama. The fox did not reply, but the water in the mindscape felt just a little bit warmer. Month 9. Spring had arrived. The UA entrance exam was exactly 1 month away. Dagoba Beach was practically unrecognizable. Where there had once been mountains of garbage, there were now vast expanses of beautiful, pristine white sand. The ocean sparkled in the afternoon sun, the waves crashing gently against the shore. All Might rode down the concrete ramp on a Segway in his deflated form, holding his clipboard. He looked out over the beach, expecting to see a small pile of trash remaining for the final month's work. Instead, he saw nothing. The beach was completely, entirely spotless. All Might's jaw dropped. He actually did it? He cleared the entire beach? But there were still at least 2 tons left according to the schedule. He frantically looked around. Sitting on the very top of the massive pile of collected scrap metal, which had been neatly stacked on the concrete seawall waiting for the city dump trucks, was Izuku Midoriya. He was shirtless, completely drenched in sweat. But he was no longer the scrawny, frail boy who had cried on a rooftop 10 months ago. His body was forged in iron. Thick, dense muscles corded across his shoulders, chest, and arms. His core was a washboard of perfectly sculpted abs. He looked like a miniature, terrifying powerhouse. The 6 whisker marks on his cheeks seemed sharper, framing a jawline that had completely lost its baby fat. Izuku stood up at the peak of the garbage mountain. He looked out at the vast, endless ocean, the sun setting the horizon on fire. He felt the wind whip through his wild green hair. He had done it. He had pushed himself beyond his limits. He had built the vessel. Izuku threw his head back and let out a roar. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear. It was a guttural, primal roar of absolute triumph. It echoed across the beach, a sound that carried the weight of 10 years of suffering, 10 months of torture, and the indomitable will of a boy who refused to be broken. Beneath the surface of the roar, intertwined with Izuku's voice, was a deep, resonant rumble. Kurama didn't speak, but the fox let his chakra pulse in time with Izuku's heartbeat, lending an ancient, terrifying weight to the boy's triumphant cry. As Izuku yelled, his legs finally gave out. The sheer exhaustion of overworking the American dream plan caught up to him all at once. He pitched forward, falling off the massive pile of scrap metal toward the concrete below. Whoosh! A massive, muscular arm caught him before he hit the ground. Izuku opened his tired eyes. All Might, in his fully buffed form, was holding him gently, looking down at him with an expression of sheer, unadulterated pride. "Excellent work, young Midoriya," All Might said, his booming voice remarkably soft. "You didn't just follow the plan. You exceeded it. You cleared the entire beach a month early. You are an overachiever in the truest sense of the word." Izuku smiled weakly, his eyelids drooping. "I wanted to be ready." All Might carefully set Izuku down on his feet, holding him steady by his shoulders. "Look at you. You were a crying child a year ago. Now you stand before me as a true vessel, a man worthy of inheriting my power." All Might reached up and plucked a single, long strand of golden blonde hair from his bangs. He held it out between his massive fingers, holding it up to the setting sun. The hair seemed to catch the light, glowing with an almost holy radiance. "This is it, Midoriya," All Might said, his smile widening. "The moment of truth. You have earned this. Now, to inherit the power of One for All, you must take some of my DNA into your body." Izuku stared at the glowing strand of hair. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The culmination of everything. The power to be a hero. All Might held the hair out further, his heroic smile faltering slightly into an awkward grin. "Eat this." Izuku blinked. The profound, epic atmosphere of the moment shattered like a dropped plate. "Eat it?" Izuku asked, looking at the hair with deep concern. "Well, yes." All Might coughed, looking slightly embarrassed. "It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it has my DNA. A hair is the easiest way. Go on, chew it well." Inside the mindscape, Kurama, who had been bracing himself for a cosmic, soul-altering ritual, face-palmed with a massive paw. "You have got to be joking," the ancient demon muttered. "I am going to share a vessel with the golden god, and the transfer method is eating a strand of dry, dead hair. The indignity of this era is going to kill me before the villains do." Izuku sighed, pinching the hair between his fingers. He closed his eyes, muttered a quick prayer, and popped it into his mouth. He swallowed hard, grimacing as it scratched the back of his throat. "Did it work?" Izuku asked, rubbing his neck. "It will take a few hours for your stomach to digest it, and for the power to integrate into your nervous system," All Might said, checking his watch. "Which is perfect timing. You need to go home, shower, eat a massive breakfast, and get to the UA entrance exam. The physical test begins in 3 hours. Izuku nodded, a fire igniting in his emerald eyes. He had the body. He had the power. He was ready, or so he thought. 2 hours later, Izuku stood in front of the towering, imposing gates of UA High School. The main building was a massive structure of glass and steel, shaped like an H, gleaming under the morning sun. Hundreds of middle school students were pouring through the gates, chatting nervously about the upcoming practical exam. Izuku took a deep breath, clutching the straps of his backpack. He was wearing his Aldera Junior High uniform. He felt good. He felt strong, but as he took his first step toward the gates, a sudden, agonizing jolt of electricity violently spiked through his chest. Izuku gasped, dropping to one knee. He clutched his heart, his vision immediately blurring. What is this? It felt as though he had swallowed a miniature star. A searing, blinding heat was erupting from his stomach, rapidly spreading through his veins like liquid gold. But almost instantly, that golden heat was met by a violent, crushing wave of freezing, dark red pressure. Izuku! Kurama's roar was deafening, echoing not just in Izuku's mind, but seemingly vibrating the very air around him. The physical world dissolved. The towering gates of UA, the chatter of the students, the morning sun, it all vanished in a blink of an eye. Izuku was violently pulled down into his own subconscious. He slammed onto the wet, stone floor of the mindscape, gasping for air. But the mindscape was no longer the quiet, dimly lit sewer he had grown accustomed to over the last 10 years. It was a war zone. The ceiling of the massive cavern was cracking open. Huge fissures of blinding, radiant golden light were tearing through the stone, illuminating the dark waters with the intensity of a midday sun. From the cracks, thousands of tiny, glowing golden orbs poured into the cavern, swirling together like a galaxy of stars. The light they emitted was pure, unadulterated righteousness. It felt warm, heroic, and incredibly ancient. It was the physical manifestation of One for All, the crystallized willpower of 8 generations of heroes, finally taking root in its 9th vessel. But One for All was not entering an empty room. It was stepping into the den of a god of destruction. "Get out of my domain!" Kurama erupted. The 9-tailed fox slammed against the massive iron bars of his cage, his eyes burning with a furious, blinding hatred. The water in the cavern instantly turned to scalding steam as Kurama unleashed a colossal wave of pure, unfiltered Bijou chakra. A hurricane of bubbling, toxic red energy exploded from the cage, crashing directly into the descending galaxy of golden light. The collision was catastrophic. Boom! The shockwave threw Izuku's mental avatar backward, skipping across the water like a stone until he slammed hard into the cavern wall. He coughed, looking up in sheer terror. The mindscape was quite literally tearing itself apart. The golden light of One for All and the demonic red chakra of Kurama were locked in a violent, swirling struggle for dominance. The golden light attempted to purify and overwrite the darkness, pulsing with a holy, resonant hum. But Kurama's hatred was too dense, too ancient. The red chakra violently corroded the edges of the golden light, eating away at the heroism with raw, acidic malice. "Stop!" Izuku screamed, pushing himself to his feet. "Stop it! You're destroying my mind!" May their power listened. The golden light began to coalesce, forming vague, towering silhouettes of men and women within the blinding glow. The echoes of the past users of One for All, sensing an incredibly powerful, malicious entity within their new host, began to flare their power aggressively, attempting to crush the villainous presence. This only enraged Kurama further. "You dare challenge me?" Kurama roared, opening his massive jaws. A dense, incredibly heavy sphere of purple-black energy began to rapidly compress in front of his mouth. A tailed beast bomb. Inside the mindscape, it was a weapon of pure spiritual annihilation. "I will scatter your lingering souls to the wind. I am Kurama. I bow to no one." Izuku realized with horrifying clarity what was about to happen. If Kurama fired that attack, and One for All retaliated, the resulting clash of spiritual energy wouldn't just destroy his mindscape. It would lobotomize him in the real world. He would be left a brain-dead husk on the steps of Yue High. He was the vessel. This was his soul. He had to take control. "I said stop." Izuku didn't just shout. He imposed his will. For 10 years, he had fought Kurama's influence. For 10 months, he had forged his body into an unbreakable fortress. He was not a bystander in his own mind anymore. Izuku sprinted directly into the center of the cavern, right between the colossal, charging-tailed beast bomb and the blinding, descending silhouettes of the past heroes. He threw his arms out wide, acting as a physical barrier between the two godlike energies. "This is my body!" Izuku roared, his voice suddenly echoing with an authority that shook the very foundations of the mindscape. A massive pulse of Izuku's own raw willpower, a brilliant, emerald-green light, exploded from his chest. It shot upward, striking the golden light of One for All, and shot forward, striking the iron bars of Kurama's cage. The effect was instantaneous. The past users of One for All, sensing the pure, heroic, and completely uncorrupted soul of their chosen successor, immediately halted their aggressive expansion. The golden light softened, dimming from a blinding glare to a warm, pulsing glow, retreating to the upper stratosphere of the mindscape. Kurama, shocked by the sheer force of the boy's spiritual command, clamped his jaws shut, swallowing the tailed beast's bomb. The massive fox stared down at the tiny, 14-year-old boy standing fearlessly in front of his cage. The turbulent waters slowly calmed. The boiling steam dissipated. Izuku stood in the center of the cavern, breathing heavily. He looked up at the golden stars swirling near the ceiling, then turned to look at the colossal fox glaring at him through the bars. "Listen to me," Izuku commanded, his voice trembling slightly from the adrenaline, but completely devoid of fear. "Both of you." He pointed up at the golden light. "You are the power I was given to save people. I honor you. I will wield you to protect this world. But you will not purge him." Izuku turned his finger, pointing directly at Kurama's massive nose. "And you? You are a part of me. You have been with me since the day I was born. I will not let them destroy you, but you will not attack them. You are in my house now. Both of you." Kurama's red-slit eyes narrowed dangerously. The massive beast lowered his head until he was eye level with the boy. The sheer size difference was comical, but the spiritual pressure was dead even. "You speak boldly for an insect," Kurama rumbled, the vibration rattling Izuku's teeth. "You invite a parasite into my domain, and then demand I play nice? I can feel what that golden light is, Izuku. It is the lingering wills of dead men. It is a power built on sacrifice. It is a cursed, suicidal power. It's a power of hope," Izuku shot back. Kurama scoffed, a dark, cynical laugh that lacked its usual venom. The fox looked up at the golden stars, his ancient eyes analyzing the energy. "Hope is just a pretty word for delusion," Kurama muttered. Then, his gaze snapped back to Izuku, sharp and deadly serious. "Listen to me closely, brat. That power, it is too dense. It is a sledgehammer, and your body is still made of glass. If you try to swing that golden hammer right now, it will shatter your bones to dust. And if you die wielding a dead man's power—" Kurama leaned closer to the bars, his breath washing over Izuku like a hot desert wind. "I die too. And I refuse to die because you wanted to play hero." Izuku swallowed hard, maintaining eye contact. "I know the risks. I have to regulate it. I can't use 100%. You cannot even use 10%, Kurama corrected harshly. "But I will make you a promise, Izuku Midoriya." The red chakra around the cage flared, just for a moment, shifting from its usual toxic, bubbling form into a smoother, more controlled crimson aura. "If that golden light breaks your body, I will mend it. I will keep your fragile vessel glued together, not out of the goodness of my non-existent heart, but to preserve my own life." However, Kurama's eyes flashed with a terrifying promise. "Do not think for a second that this makes us allies. If you show weakness, if you let the fear consume you, I will tear that golden light from your soul, consume it, and take control of your body permanently. Do we have an understanding?" It was an ultimatum. It was a threat. But buried deep beneath the malice, it was also a truce. Kurama was offering to be the safety net for one for all's recoil. The golden power would destroy, and the red power would heal. Two opposing forces, balanced on the razor's edge of a 14-year-old boy's willpower. Izuku didn't hesitate. He stepped right up to the iron bars, looking the literal manifestation of hatred in the eye. "Understood," Izuku said firmly. "I won't break. I won't let you down, Kurama." The giant fox huffed, an amused smirk briefly crossing his terrifying visage. He turned around, his 9 massive tails sweeping behind him, and walked back into the deepest shadows of the cage. "We shall see, brat. Now wake up. You have an exam to fail." The mindscape violently dissolved. Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. He was still on one knee in front of the UA gates. Only a few seconds had passed in the real world. The sun was still shining. The students were still walking past him, giving him weird looks for suddenly dropping to the ground. Izuku slowly stood up. He placed a hand over his heart. He could feel it. Deep within his chest, intertwined like the strands of a double helix, were 2 completely distinct heartbeats. One was a rapid, pulsing rhythm that radiated a golden, blinding warmth. It felt like the sun. It was eager, heroic, and begging to be unleashed. one for all. The other was a slow, heavy, tectonic thud. It radiated a dark, intense heat. It was cynical, ancient, and immensely powerful. Kurama. He wasn't quirkless anymore. He was a vessel housing two gods. A small, confident smile broke across Izuku's face. He adjusted the straps of his yellow backpack, took a deep breath of the morning air, and took his first step onto the grounds of UA High School. Out of my way, Deku, the harsh, gravelly voice shattered the moment. Izuku looked over his shoulder. Katsuki Bakugo was walking up the path, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his crimson eyes glaring daggers at Izuku. Don't stand in front of me, Bakugo growled, marching past Izuku without even breaking his stride. I'll kill you. Izuku watched his childhood bully walk away. In the past, he would have trembled. He would have stammered an apology, and cowered out of the way. But not today. Inside Izuku's mind, Kurama let out a low, mocking chuckle. Let us see how loud the explosive ape barks when he realizes the quirkless loser holds the power to vaporize this entire academy. Izuku didn't respond to the fox. He just kept smiling, his emerald eyes burning with a quiet, unshakable determination. I'm going to show you, Kaken, Izuku thought, walking through the towering gates. I'm going to show the whole world. The UA entrance exam was about to begin, and Izuku Midoriya was finally ready to fight.